Yeah.
So I'd like to give a brief primer about birds, some aspects of them. This is not going to be exhaustive. There's a lot of things we can talk about birds, but just a brief history about them and maybe the state of birds in India and the kinds of birds that we've been seeing around here. So birds are quite ancient. Birds evolved from reptiles, and the extinction of the dinosaurs left us with just birds as one of the few remnants from that time. And as you can see, there's some recent research which shows that several dinosaurs which we have traditionally thought of as looking one way were possibly feathered as well, including Tyrannosauruses. And it's quite amazing. Feathers don't preserve very well in fossil records. So this is something that's only been discovered and debated within the scientific community for the last few years. So the dinosaurs that preceded birds had already started having some bird-like adaptations, and it's quite fascinating to even imagine. We have no idea what kind of colors they would have looked like or how long the feathers were. This is just some of the few representations that they could have been. And the reason we know this is that there's an extremely famous fossil called Archaeopteryx, which shows the missing link between reptiles and birds. And here you can see it's one of the few cases where you can see feather imprints in wing-like structures. And that shows the bird side, but also it's clearly reptilian because you can't see it from the photo over here, it's not zoomed in enough, but there are reptile-like teeth in the mouth, where birds don't have teeth typically. And the tail is very typical of a reptile. So this was a fairly groundbreaking discovery at the time. And as birds emerged and flourished, it was quite an amazing time to, if we could have witnessed it. What happened was the sizes of the first birds was huge because dinosaurs were in general quite large, and the ancestors of birds ended up being a group of dinosaurs that was quite large. The same group that housed the velociraptors, they shared a common ancestor. So what happened immediately was the body sizes started shrinking as birds started to become more active, started to learn how to fly. And being heavy and large was a severe disadvantage at the time. So here you can see Archaeopteryx's skull, Velociraptor's skull, and the skulls of modern chickens and pigeons. And just to get a closer look at the differences between the two, this is the missing link, Archaeopteryx on the left, and a chicken skull. And you can see what I was saying about teeth in the mouth. It's immediate that you'll notice that teeth preserve extremely well. And as birds started to emerge, they colonized new habitats. They were a new life form with a new body plan, and that meant that evolution could explore multiple different directions. So this is a illustration from a 2012 paper from exploring a group of birds called Vangas in Madagascar. And in just this one group, you can see, of course, it's an island, so there's usually a lot of evolution that happens there, but you can see that there's a lot of different forms that one bird takes, that one kind of bird takes. And you, looking at the smallest one over here, you would hardly associate this to have any relation to the one over here. But it's quite fascinating. This happens every time there is a new kind of body plan that's successful and that can take advantage of the planet. And looking at their body plans, looking at how birds are shaped, there's a lot that we can learn about their behavior, their habits, and particularly what they eat. So beak shape is directly correlated with what the bird is feeding on. So if you look at this one over here, we have birds that look very similar to this. Can anyone give me a quick name?
Sunbirds.
Sunbirds. Sunbirds have long curved beaks, and they use those to feed on nectar, and they do so it's advantageous to them because flowers are often long and stalk-like shaped. So their beaks are perfectly adapted to fit into flowers, extract nectar, and pull them out. And of course, there are birds of different habitats like kingfishers, which have beaks which are intended to pierce and hold on to fish. So there are a whole lot of, you get almost all of these, I would say every single one of these beak shapes is found in Indian birds as well. It just depends on the habitat that you're in. This is one of my personal favorites. It's something that you'll see in only a very select group of shorebirds, and it's to do with how they fish. And the cool thing is that now we're at a point where birds have been around for a while. They've established very fixed shapes. They will keep evolving over time, assuming they survive us. And some of those shapes are very distinctive. Now if you see an outline of a bird, a silhouette of a bird, you know that it's a bird and not a mammal and not a reptile. This is a particularly interesting bird because this is the great hornbill. You find it in a couple of parts of India. You find it in the Western Ghats. You find it in the Northeast and some parts of the Eastern Himalayas. It's a very striking bird. It's huge. It's about, if one was standing next to me, it would reach from about my waist to my head easily. And when they fly, their wings are so large and their wing beats are so powerful that you can hear them from several, tens of meters away at least. But this is just one possible form that birds could have taken. And the interesting thing is, it's happened more than once. So hornbills are found only in parts of Africa and Southeast Asia. But in the Americas, you have a bird which looks extremely similar. These are toucans. And you can see that it's not just the beak shape, it's the overall body plan that is followed almost similar directions. So what's interesting here is that it puzzled people for a long time as to why this was happening and how come unrelated birds or unrelated animals of different kinds in different parts of the world which had no connection with each other, how could they be so similar? And you see this in insects, you see this in snakes, you see this in mammals of all kinds. And it turns out that the habitats that they live in require very specific adaptations. So hornbills and toucans have large beaks for the purposes of how they feed, how they construct very elaborate nests which require a lot of strength. There are multiple uses that they have for it, including how they catch food. And it turns out that toucans in South America are filling in pretty much the same, we call it an ecological niche, as hornbills do over here. This is not the only example that we have. Hummingbirds in the Americas have the exact same body plan as sunbirds do over here. And when you see them side by side, the way they behave, the way they fly just next to flowers, you can see that their functions are almost the same in the same kind of ecosystem. And coming to India, India has, of the world's roughly 10,000 species of birds, India has about just under 1,400 of them, which is a huge amount considering the amount of landmass we have versus the rest of the world. But India is also in a very unique position. So India separated from Africa a very long time back and slammed into Asia. And we found ourselves in this interesting position of being in the middle of several different migratory paths and simultaneously having a lot of different kinds of habitats. We have everything from deserts and coasts to rainforests to the tallest peaks of the Himalayas. And it's fantastic opportunities for birds to settle and diversify there as well. So we have several species of birds that have evolved on our continent and become endemic to just India. Endemic meaning they are found nowhere else in the world. These are some of the most popular migratory routes that birds take. So India being right here, you can see we're slam in the middle of pathways for birds that are going from Russia down to Africa, southern tips. There's up and down migration, things which are going through to Australia, which somehow sneak past the northeast. So there's a lot of stuff happening here. And I'd just like to show a couple of examples. We'll get to migration a bit. This just some of the diversity that we have. We have some of the largest birds in the country, such as this great Indian bustard. It's extremely sad. It's a critically endangered species. There are just you can count the number of individuals left. I think it's less than 300, and it's tragic because it requires a habitat which is vastly underrated, I would say, by Indian conservationists and forest departments and policy makers, which is savanna grasslands, the same kind of environment that our cheetahs required. And that's pretty much the reason we lost the cheetah. It looks like unless something severe changes quickly, the great Indian bustard and many other birds which share its habitat are on the same pathway. And then we have really, really tiny birds, such as this flower pecker. This is found in Malhar, and it is one of the smallest birds in the whole of Asia. It's quite amazing. The bird is hardly bigger than my pinky finger, and yet all the same organs that are present in the great Indian bustard are present in this one as well. And you have some strange species. This is one of my personal favorites. It's a type of it's one of a group of birds which is called the parrotbills. And we have very few of them in India. Most of them are in the northeast, but this is one species which you can find pretty much throughout the subcontinent, and it's absolutely gorgeous. This photo was taken just last week, not too far from Malhar, and they do come into Malhar as well. And you have some kinds of migrations that we'll talk about. So this is the Siberian crane. It's well known to winter in India, in central India, and Bharatpur Kevaladev Bird Sanctuary is one of the best places to observe this bird. Fantastic habitat. They're enormous, and they breed there. And a group of birds that people don't really like very much, because they're terrible to when you have to try to identify them. So these are two kinds of warblers. One is called the green and one is called the greenish. The one on the right is the green, the one on the left is the greenish, and there's a small map which shows the blue corresponds to the greenish warbler, the red corresponds to the green. So I'd just like to show a small animation of what the populations are doing. This is data that's collected from citizen scientists, which is basically anyone with a smartphone who observe birds anywhere in the world and uploads that as a record. So this is the month of May, and you can see we're going into late summer, the birds are dispersing, and look what happens in winter. Almost the entire winter population of these two birds is within India and parts of Southeast Asia. And then in summer they go back out again. And this happens every single year. So our forests are flooded with these guys. Both of them are found in Malhar. In the drawing they look quite different. In reality they are tame. Any bird watcher will tell you that. They have one giveaway, which is their calls have a slight difference that if you're listening carefully you can pick it up. And most people who like migratory birds will recognize this. This is the bar-headed goose, and it is also a winter visitor to India. And you can see this is in winter, beginning of the year. They spread out throughout Central Asia, and again, almost the entire population winters in the subcontinent. It's quite amazing. If you go to any good quality wetland, even in Karnataka, this is a perfect time to go. They come in the hundreds. Around Bangalore, the numbers have been fewer and fewer because our water bodies aren't of the best quality. But find large lakes and you will see these guys. They're phenomenal to watch. And this is a species which is very close to my heart. This is the Indian Pitta. Pittas are a group of rather secretive forest birds. They tend to hang around, they skulk, which is they hang around in very, very dark and hard to see and hard to reach places, generally covered by vegetation. And that's because they're very, very brightly colored. This one bird has green on the back, a black and white eye stripe, this sandy brown which extends onto the belly, bright red bum, and it's just where the tail meets the body, where we call that the rump. This is an electric turquoise. I don't know what the color is. And there are, when it spreads its wings, there's even more. They are very, very beautiful to look at, very hard to see, and very loud. They call very, very loudly. So we have seen it at Malhar. I don't know if anyone has seen it this season, but they are almost definitely around and are probably just hiding from us. That's for a different presentation. And this is how pittas move. They're pretty much restricted to India, maybe parts of Nepal. They migrate within the country, and for a country that's this small, it's quite amazing that they would do that. You wouldn't think there would be such a need to migrate, but clearly there is. So a friend of mine who is an avid bird watcher is about my age. He lives in Mumbai, and he would always travel around parts of Maharashtra to look for birds. And it was only when he came to Bangalore several years into being a bird watcher that he saw his first pitta. And he explained that as him living in a gap where the summer population is just north of him and the winter population is just south. And if he misses them migrating over, he's not got them at all. Now, the information that we've just seen, the migratory pathways of all these birds, it's possible because of, as I said, people, everyday people, it doesn't need to be scientists, it's really anyone who has an interest in birds can upload that data. And this is just a representation of the kinds of the parts of India, the hotspots in India where people are using these kinds of portals. So red represents all the citizen scientists, I guess. And you can see there's a lot of the parts of the country which are not well covered. So there's a lot that we still don't know. But using this information in February of last year, 2020, a report called The State of India's Birds was released. And it was a partnership between several institutes. And what they were trying to do was extremely ambitious. It was to try to see, based on just citizen science records, what the trends of all Indian species have been. And this is where the power of citizen science comes in, because now we're going into direct impact on conservation, on policy making. And not all birds could be analyzed. Some birds are so rare that you can't really tell much from the data, but I think close to 700 or 800 birds were examined closely, and trends were reported for all of them. So we'll start off with some good news. Everyone's favorite bird, the peafowl, unless you're a farmer, in which case I'm very sorry. They're a real nuisance and they're a horrible bird to have around. But they're beautiful, so who cares, right? The peafowl is a very interesting bird. It's specialized with slightly dry habitats. And as India has slowly gotten more and more arid, the range of the peafowl has been expanding. So we can see this in one generation itself, which is 20 years ago, up to 20 years ago, peafowls were very rare, if not unheard of, in most of Kerala. And today, almost all parts of Kerala have reported peafowl sightings. So you can see in real time that not just the species is moving, but that our country and our planet is changing, our climate is changing. This is the trend of peafowl populations just in the last 20 years. And you can see it's increased by 100%, which is ridiculous. You don't see this with most conservation efforts, and here it's happening by itself.
And
Yeah.
one question specific to this tendency. Could it be that the report in sighting and the reporting during that period was probably far lower compared to probably the last 5-6 years?
Absolutely. There is an increase in reporting, but this is only looking at percentage of reports. So we're trying to average and correct for the bias. But for more detailed, a more detailed examination of the exact methods which were used, I highly encourage everyone who's interested to check out the State of India Birds report. It is freely accessible on the website.
There's
and
also the anecdotal reports, right? Like the one of
there's absolutely. Salim Ali also made a particular note of peafowl, which was that he already did extensive surveys throughout the country, but in particular of Kerala, he noted that peafowl was never seen during his time, and now every birder gets it. So what's also interesting is we're trying, bird watchers and citizen scientists are trying to set up these initiatives now which will act as monitoring, which they're calling bird atlases. So Mysore recently did a bird atlas where they mapped out the entire city and tried to report systematically what kinds of birds were being found where. And now currently atlas for the entire Kerala is being attempted, as well as several other states. So yes, there is bias. We're trying to get better at accounting for it, and definitely going forward things will change because we didn't have systematic kind of efforts earlier.
Do you also have a number for the number of peacocks? I mean, you said 100 peafowl.
Yeah, I don't have hard numbers on their populations.
Do we have too many or?
If you ask, it's an unpopular answer, but yeah, peafowl are what we would call least concern. They're not detrimental to other birds, from what I know, but they are predatory to several things. So they're a mild nuisance, I would say. Mostly it's to farmers because they do dig up crops. And house sparrows, everyone has heard that sparrows are declining, and that we need to build nest boxes for them, that we need to shut down radio towers. Now there's a lot of worry that 5G, earlier it was 3G, then 4G, now 5G is going to make sparrow populations decline. And it's interesting that no one had actually done a systematic study on the effects of any of these things on sparrow populations. And there were some studies which were using problematic science, shall we say, which pointed in one direction, and there were some which pointed in the other direction, and there was not a lot of conclusivity. So from the data, we found that in cities, sparrows are declining, and that's the drivers for that we don't know. It would require some kind of experimentation, and it would require proper in-depth study on this one species. But overall, sparrows are still, they're doing fine. It could be that just that sparrow populations are moving to different places rather than that they are going extinct. And that's fantastic news, I think. A lot of worry was there over this. And not just for this one species, but for related species as well. It was thought that if sparrows are going extinct because of radio towers, then who's to say the same won't happen to all the other birds? Now, the State of India's birds also struck home a little closer. This is a small minuet that Sandeep had photographed. Sandeep, was this photographed in your house?
Yeah.
So this is from H cluster footprints. And the small minuet is also showing a strong decline in its population trends. Luckily, this species has a very wide range, so it might survive some amount of this, but we really don't know what its future holds. And another bird which is unfortunately it's not been seen at Malhar for many years back now, but I think in 2014, 2015 I did see it a few times, is the common woodchuck. It's a gorgeous bird. You will find them in most woodland habitats, and you still find them in many parts of the outskirts of Bangalore, but Malhar appears not to be one of them at this point. So the common wood shrike is also showing strong declines throughout the country. And again, it might be saved because it too has a really broad range. It's found in many parts of India. And speaking specifically about birds in Malhar, there is so much variety, it's astounding. So this is just a series of birds that were mostly photographed here, but all the species have been seen and recorded here in this last year as well. So on top we have the white-cheeked barbet. This is, even if you haven't noticed it, you would have heard its call. It's locally called like a kutru bird because that's the sound it makes. In the middle is a bird that has been seen here only twice and only by one person in his first week of bird watching, and he photographed it as well. This photo is not his, but this is a blue bearded bee eater, and it's the biggest bee eater of all of them. And it's got a fantastic tuft of feathers which comes down around its throat. And the black drongo, this you can see typically there are two species of drongos that you can get over here. There are more, but two common species. And the black drongo can be distinguished by having a spot near the mouth. They don't always have it, but when you see it, you know it's a black drongo. This is a Indian scops owl. We've seen them close to many people's houses. Sandhya had one sitting on her on the ledge above her window. This is the Tickle's blue flycatcher. I think Jeet shot this in his backyard either when he was in Malhar or when he was still in Enclave. And it's an extremely gorgeous bird. Adarsh, who's at the back, spent many hours recording its nesting behavior last summer, and it's a absolutely.
This is the one in resonance.
This is the one which was nesting in the bird box. And they might be back. Apparently, the male and female have started courting one another again.
Are they using the same house again?
But they are in resonance again. So hopefully they'll go back.
To footprints age.
At the bottom right, there's one of the least easily observable bulbuls. This is a bulbul. It's called a white-browed bulbul, and it's got a loud gurgling. It's a call. It sounds like it's being waterboarded actually. Just a few more birds.
Oh, I don't know.
These guys are very, very striking. Sandeep was obsessed with this bird for a long time. I'm not going to tell too many stories of Sandeep's because he has a talk tomorrow and he's going to cover most of this. But this is a male avadavat, and it only takes this color in the breeding season. The rest of the time it's much more drab. The breeding season has just ended. They breed exactly when the monsoons come, and as soon as the rains disappear, so do the birds. This is familiar in everyone's garden, but just seen on its own, I still think it's one of the most pretty birds here. It's got such an elaborate crest. It's got this, war paint on its face.
Lovely sound.
Lovely sound, yes. And this is an oriental honey buzzard. It's a small bird of prey, but what's funny about it is that if you just draw a line right about there, it looks like it's a pigeon on top and a completely different bird at the bottom. Cormorants can be seen at any wetland. There are many of them that fly over Malhar, and several of them which can be seen when the Bille Lake gets water in it. This is a laughing dove. It's a very unusual view of a laughing dove. Usually you can't see such clear throat patterns. It's hidden. But this is one of my favorite photos of them. I think that's Manmat's photo or Naresh's photo. And all terraces residents will immediately recognize the flamebacks. This was one of the flamebacks which was nesting in the dead coconut tree there. So just looking at the screen here, you can already see, just look at the beaks. You can already see such diversity. This would be, any guesses?
Grain.
I'm hearing grain, insects. It's a mix of things. It's mostly grains, grains and seeds. These guys are mostly fruit eating, but they are, I think, partly omnivorous. Fruits make up a big part of their diet. Just from the previous slide. Any guesses for up here? Nectar, fruit? It's a bee eater.
Yeah, it doesn't need that shape for eating.
Yeah. So it's likely, I mean, not all of the birds fall neatly into one category or the other. They do have mixed diets. Some of them are omnivores and will take living creatures as well. But it's quite fantastic. You can see this in person, any bird that you see. So what we often encourage is that when you see a new bird and you're not sure what it is, try and make a note of things like the beak shape and how it's sitting. These are all small clues. It's not just the color. There are a myriad of other ways in which you can describe a bird. Why do we watch birds? I mean, yeah, they're pretty, and maybe some are going extinct, maybe some are, their populations are exploding. But there are many reasons that watching birds can be important to you or me. A lot of people find it recreational, and they find that it's therapeutic in some ways. There are numerous studies that are going on at this point, COVID onwards, that bird watching helps in stress relief and aids in overall quality of life. But there are more tangible reasons as well, direct reasons. There's building of your personal knowledge and also building of the larger knowledge available to science, which directly contributes to citizen science, which directly contributes to conservation in many cases. So we all have different approaches. Some of us watch them out of enjoyment. Some of us watch them out of, I don't know, maybe duty. There are many approaches, and there's no one right way. But I think anyone who spends a long enough time doing it for whatever reason ends up falling in love with them one way or the other. And there are many different tools of the trade, but the basics are a pair of binoculars and a bird field guide, a good book. These are the two things which are essential to anyone who is really interested in taking up the hobby, sport, scientific pursuit of watching birds. And any bird watcher will tell you that these two things pay for themselves many times over. There are many more advanced ways to look at birds. There's also journaling. There's, if you enjoy drawing, that's a fantastic way to document birds. Photography and equipments that scientists use to conduct studies can range from drones in some cases to the very simple bird tags, which are little rings which are attached to birds' feet, and they help understand how individuals move in a place. And yeah, telemetry. So some birds are now Arctic terns, which are a type of water bird. They are famous for flying the longest migratory route of any bird in the world, and it's literally a migration that is pole to pole every single year and back. And I think it's estimated that in the average Arctic tern's lifetime, it flies roughly the distance from here to the moon 3 times, which is ridiculous. So following the route of those birds is extremely tricky, and telemetry actually helps that. So putting a chip in a bird and being able to track it, it would have been impossible otherwise. And just ending on a note about citizen science, we've seen that citizen science is now picking up in India. There are already bright sparks all over southern, central, and parts of northern India and eastern India. But there are lots of places where we don't have information from. There are a lot of dark spots here. And it would be fantastic to see that people pick it up more and more there as well. Of course, it's always going to be clustered around cities and places where people are. This isn't possible to have lots of citizen science reports coming from inaccessible places. But the more people who pick up bird watching and documenting, the better for birds in the long run.
You have that much in the Andamans?
The Andamans are actually very well birded, I would say. There's one is they're extremely accessible. There are no major mountains. The forests are fairly you can navigate most of them, and more importantly, along the coast. So what you're seeing, the extremely bright spots, they will probably be the coastline. So you'll see that India's coasts are also very similar. And a lot of people also do pelagic birding, where they go out onto ships and bird from the sea. So yeah, I think the fate of many birds relies on us. The events that we hold here over the next few weeks, maybe they're not aiding in conservation directly, but I mean, I'm really happy to see so many young people also attending all of our talks. There are a few here today. I think if there's interest being shown, there's a chance, because all the conservation action won't really help unless there's urgency in us that something needs to be done. This is, we all know about vultures that are on the way out. There are still a few which you can find around Malhar, but this is one that used to be found bang in the center of the city, and as late as I think the 1980s. Now it's only possible to see them in Ramnagaram, but they're still very much around.
What is the reason behind that?
Vulture declines have happened throughout the world, and the reasons are varied. It depends on place to place. In some places they have been intentionally driven out and exterminated. In India, it's an accidental occurrence. They are allergic, severely allergic. They are unable to digest a chemical which is used in pain relief for veterinary purposes. So vultures feeding on the carcasses of cows which have had the drug in them would die very, very soon after. The problem is you can't really stop it from happening when it's a widespread phenomenon. So it only matters what people do in an area so much, but the neighborhood effect is very strong. So vultures have declined by over 90%, I think, in India since the 1990s to now. But there is every single species, no species has yet gone extinct, and they do survive in remnant habitat. Given time, there may be a chance of a comeback, but the problem is they breed very slowly, so we just don't know.
Just one question. Why India? Why are all these migratory birds coming all the way to India and then going back?
Not all of them are coming all the way to India.
The ones that do, what is it about India that what kind of weather, climate, whatever, what is it?
So the reasons for that are really the reasons for migration in the first place, which is either following some kind of resource or escaping certain kinds of conditions. And typically birds in the temperate climates migrate to warmer places for their summers. This is probably a pattern which has held true since before the continents rearranged into their current configuration. And these migratory paths have now, the birds and other animals have just evolved with that. So we can't explain every single migratory path, but roughly it's this, and it's typically following some kind of monsoonal rains or wind currents which will take them anyway.
But it's not showing Bangladesh because people wouldn't have been recording it there, or are they not going?
No, they're definitely going there. Several birds do pass through Bangladesh. Records may be the reason we're not seeing those sparks light up. It's probably that. But
there isn't much difference. That's why I'm countries.
No, but also we were looking at only very select species. So this is not representative of all migratory birds.
No, I meant those two which you said come all the way to India.
Yeah. That could just be reporting problems.
Sandhya, it could be the visa rules.
Absolutely.
Just as a follow-up to what Sandhya was asking, is it true that the migratory birds turn up at the same spot every year?
It's hard to say. Anecdotally, people will tell you yes. I don't think enough studies have been done in India to confirm this, because it's very hard to confirm whether the gull that I see at this coast of Mumbai is the same individual as what came last time.
Unless it's tagged.
Unless
Or
it's tagged.
chipped, yeah.
Right, chipped.
or- yeah.
Right, okay, great. The other thing I wanted to know is that you showed the hornbill, the toucans, and etc. In the different continents, and you said that it fills up a certain ecological niche.
That's
Right? Could it be that they had all had a common ancestor while before the continental drift?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one way in which this happens. The examples which I showed are interesting because that's following a pattern of convergent evolution, where their ancestor, when the two species were ancestrally related, the ancestor did not have those features. So it's a trait which evolved separately as they were separated.
That's interesting.
That is, it's very, very interesting, and there are many theories as to the exact mechanics of that. But broadly, it's seen in many forms of life. Yeah.
Sure, thanks.
The thought of these people, the birds which started migrating and meaning to go all the way to Africa and suddenly realize India has moved and come up here. Must happen.
I wonder about this as well. There are insects as well. There's
But they got
there's a-
reasonable time to adjust to that as well. It wasn't overnight.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, but there's always someone who must have said, again you lost the way. Did not ask for permission.
There's also you could wonder whether they're like the frog in the slowly boiling water, right? They don't notice and suddenly they just keep doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that could happen.
Chayant, I was wondering, with so much of extinction happening, what are there some initiatives that are being taken from the conservation side? Globally or in India, any idea?
Globally, there are many efforts. In India, it's particularly difficult because a lot of the birds which are at risk are birds that require either very specific kinds of habitats or habitats which are not protected. So one of the groups of birds which is showing a strong decline, the most worrying decline, is shorebirds and birds which use wetlands and beaches. And by and large, those are not properly accounted for in conservation planning in the country. So that is something that needs to change. That is a country by country basis. So in other parts of the world, there have been success with protecting habitat, but over here, that's a huge hurdle we have to cross.
And why do you say it's worrying in the sense, what's the impact for it's becoming extinct? I mean, is there a documented impact of these birds being extinct?
So
Because
if
the
a
cases
single
will
species
impact-
goes extinct, suppose the cormorants that we get over here go extinct, perhaps it does not matter. There are other species of cormorants, there are birds like cormorants which do more or less the same thing. But there's a very famous quote in ecology which is, tug on one animal and you'll find attached to it the rest of the world. And every animal is, we're more and more realizing this, every species is not just an individual species but an ecosystem for many other things. So there are interconnections between species which, and the problem is we just don't know what those interconnections are. So a species going extinct by our cause is something that we just don't know what the impact will be, but it's very likely that it will have some kind of domino effect.
So this is a butterfly effect kind of thing.
Something like that. Very, very similar.
Could it be that the peafowl numbers are increasing because eating peacocks has been banned?
Could be, but as you'll probably know, in many places, banning does not result in enforcement. So peafowl are still present in places where enforcement is not really taking place. I don't think anything really explains it to the same extent as changes in our rainfall and changes in the climatic data, which are also showing very similar trends.
Aridness.
Actually,
Exactly.
if you travel in the rural areas, you actually see them kill peacocks by the dozens actually. They
Even now?
eat them. So for them,
It's not always for meat.
Yeah, it's
It's
a-
not agriculture.
agriculture. So it's not that people conserve it. It's only the cities that we say it's a national animal. We need to protect it and things like that. But once you go to the rural areas, the first thing they say is, "I see a peacock, kill it." because it will harm the grains, it will kill snakes, it will kill the other rodents. So they have a varied list of reasons just to kill them.
And it's quite amazing that that perspective shift between, I mean, you don't think about it. When we see the bird, it's just a beautiful bird, I guess. But attitudes are very different.
But
And
it's like the elephants, right? Trampling over people's fields and it's just
most
a menace
often
for
it's
them.
with wild boar, which are whatever, wild pigs.
Right.
So it's the same attitude. They're classified as vermin, and peafowl will never be classified as vermin because of their cultural significance. But that's not rooted in the data about their biology. It doesn't take into account any of that.
So wild pig is also.
Wild pig is considered a pest in most parts of the country. The way that they feed and the fact that they're in herds, it means that they end up causing a lot of damage to agricultural ecosystems. So farmers find them a huge nuisance. And also, if they're encountered at night, they can be
Violent.
They can be dangerous.
Tell me, sorry, just to take on from her question, the vultures, are there drives going on right now to try and preserve the grounds that they require?
Absolutely. The problem, it's a very challenging thing to do. One is it's hard to even monitor vultures because they're very wide ranging and they give you very few new offspring every year. So in a few protected areas where the habitat is ideal, you can still find vultures in what I would call okay numbers, but what anyone else who has seen vultures there for years would call terrible. I think the real problem is that you can't control what an individual bird is going to eat, and the chemical which has caused their downfall is still in use. It's banned, officially banned, but the same derivative of that is used in human administration.
Which one is this?
It's diclofenac.
Oh.
And it's cheap, so it makes economic sense for farmers to just purchase the over-the-counter versions and administer to the livestock.
Closest one is Ramnagar, vulture sanctuary.
They're cropping up. The solution will be to have more and more protected areas or sanctuaries for certain kinds of landscapes or species.
This came about recently, right?
The Ramnagar one, it's in the last 20 years.
So this would not be an enclosed one. This would be just like make the surroundings inadequate for them to want to stay there.
Yeah, I mean also with birds, especially flighted birds, you can't enclose it.
Yeah,
Otherwise
that's why I'm
it's a
wondering
zoo.
what are we, I mean, are they sanctuary with cages or what is what
Yeah.
I'm asking?
No, so how do they, so what does the sanctuary actually mean?
That's what I wanted to
The
say.
sanctuary just means that the area that's notified is not, it's extremely restricted in the kinds of human activities that are permitted.
And access, I guess.
So,
Access,
When
yeah.
the use of ibuprofen among animals there is monitored very closely. There
in that area.
Yeah.
Chayant, I had a question more on birders than in birding. I've been birding for quite some time, mostly as a solo activity, not expert. I enjoy it almost 40 years now. 1981, I remember class 11 was my first birding trip. Over the years, a lot of things have changed. One of the good things that has happened is the quality of optics in this country has increased tremendously.
Throughout the world.
So the word and accessibility to those things, some of it in our country. I don't know what all of your young birders, one of the more disturbing things, at least from my optic, is this listing business and the use of these things to call birds.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what's your view on these two things? This amazing urge to list. Today I've got 42. In this trip I've got 38. And the moment you get finished 38, you finish, your birding is done. Or you're looking for a specific thing. You'll only look for that and nothing else.
We call it twitching.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's nice. You're bringing up two different points. One is
What was the second one? Calling them for?
using playback.
See, it's
Oh,
kind
you
of
like
difficult to see. You actually
Oh.
have, now it's very easy. There are apps, there are recordings of the calls.
Oh, you play this.
Or you play so that you can,
We
So
just
there are-
experienced that in Cork.
it's all over.
Yeah.
It's all over. And sometimes it's very useful. You're doing a scientific study, you need to find out how many in 1 square kilometer, you do that. But it's almost like obsessiveness. How do
Absolutely.
I get a ROI or whatever? I've come to this place spending so much money, how do I get a ROI?
Yeah. Well, So I'll try and answer one by one. The first on ethics of different kinds of practices, and so whether it's playback or invasive kinds of photography, getting really close to nests. There are many practices which are very widespread, and monitoring is extremely difficult. They are frowned upon in general. I think it's something which you cannot. Whatever my personal view on it is, you're not going to be able to enforce anything unless you lead by example. So there are this is a field in which it has now become, now that the barrier to entry has now become really low, it's become a very crowded market. So the only way to stand out is to be doing something else. I think it's up to people who are very, very charismatic, very, very renowned in this field, and that's rarely scientists. It's usually photographers or wildlife filmmakers, celebrities of some kind, to really, really step down on this and lead by example. Yes, it's extremely, I don't agree with playback. I think it's particularly damaging for many kinds of birds. There are some kinds of birds which may not be affected, but a large number of them are. States are also starting to crack down on this. So I think it's Himachal Pradesh right now where playback is outlawed, and of course that doesn't mean anything if it's not enforced, but steps are being, it is recognized as a problem. So that's one direction, one step in the right direction, I would say. With regards to the second thing of listing and an obsessive kind of need to grab species and tally up numbers, I don't know. It's not my cup of tea, but it is for many kinds of people, and I don't know how that matters to me. If that's their drive, then that's their drive. It's pretty much the same as there's this game which was really popular and was also in the news for being dangerous to play, called Pokemon Go. And a lot of e-birders and citizen scientists are pretty much doing the same thing, which is going around and trying to catch them all or whatever it is. So if that's a drive, as long as it's not being harmful to a species, it can be when you do really invasive travel and try to catch really range restricted species. I wouldn't agree with it there, but for the most part, if it's harmless, I think it's fine. Let people go up
Once
and
I've observed as harmless, to honest, I was more questioning what's the best that's jarring me. So
it's hard. I mean, at the end of the day, I've just had to come to terms with the fact that I don't understand other people, and that's okay.
I think it's very worrying when they start trying to take selfies with the birds. Right? That's good.
The difference, and I don't even beat to the strips and all of that.
Yeah,
all
no, I'm
the
saying
other groups.
if, I'm saying
Then
if
you
they
come back
decide-
to the resort, and the first thing, what's your counter rate? Okay, I mean,
But considering you're talking to the group which took 40 minutes to cross from one gate of footprints to the other
yeah,
gate of
so,
footprints.
no, I also this is for, there is a whatever age gap difference, or whether you folks see it from the same angle. Is it something that
I don't think it's necessarily generational. I do think that generations, it is. I do think that generations that grew up and were birding, people who were birding before these kinds of practices were possible and widespread, it's not such a thing now for them. But for people who did grow up, within it there is a huge divide. So it's not a unified point of view.
Right.
I think like any obsession, it will take its course, and usually it will spread onto something else, but that's more to do with people's personalities than the sport itself, I guess. There is also, like, Bangalore bird race just happened, and it just caters to that, but it's still something which is...
What does it do?
A bird race is, it's like a one-day event where you have a defined area where you're allowed to travel in any form you choose, and dawn to dusk, get as much as you can.
Pictures?
Just write it down and submit it now to citizen science. So all of these things, citizen science can be used as a tool for good, but similarly to how I can upload a checklist, I can also upload photographs, and I can upload sensitive information like the exact location I saw a bustard or its call, and then some other person can just download that and go and play it back and find their own bustard, and if the whole country does that, we won't have any birds left.
True. Send one more question. How do you know that the same people, how do you do the census of these birds? How do you know that the same birds aren't being listed by a whole bunch of people, and then you think there are enough of them?
You have to have certain best practices. So if you're walking in a circular path or you're walking one way and walking back, then you have to make separate lists that account for that. Generally, the data which is used to make the analyses which I showed, it is data which meets a certain kind of specification.
Oh, there has been.
Yeah, so it accounts for that to some extent. But otherwise, it's really difficult, especially in like a big lake where there are thousands of birds. You cannot be sure that the one that you see now is not the one you saw 15 minutes ago.
Or even that somebody else saw, right? I mean, if 10 people are doing the census kind of thing.
Exactly.
You might be just ending up with the same number.
All right, well, if there are no more questions, thank you all for coming. This concludes.